Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, what if modern medicine, ancient healing traditions, and even fundamental physics could all speak the same language? Today, we're diving into a really fascinating theory from our source material that proposes exactly that, a grand unification of all knowledge. It basically argues that the biggest leap forward might actually be a step back, to a time when all these systems weren't so divided.
So to get our heads around this whole thing, we're going to follow the source's logic. First, we'll look at why medicine got so fragmented in the first place. Then, we'll unpack the proposed solution, this idea of a grand unification. We'll dig into its core mechanism, something called Cymatics. From there, we'll see how the theory tries to bridge science and spirituality. And then finally, we'll ask the big question, what could we actually do with an idea this huge?
All right, so to really understand the solution, we have to get a handle on the problem. The source kicks things off by pointing to what it calls a great regret in the history of knowledge, a moment in time when medicine just splintered into all these competing and often conflicting systems. The source points a finger at a very specific turning point, the late 18th century. See, before this, different systems of knowledge were a lot more intertwined, but then things really started to break apart. Allopathy, what we'd now call modern medicine, began to split off from other practices. Homeopathy popped up as its own thing, and right around the same time, a huge wedge was driven between scientific medicine and traditional systems like Ayurveda, and eventually faith-based healing itself.
And the author argues that this isn't just some dusty old history, it's a crisis that's playing out right now. The source is basically saying we're making the exact same mistake today, letting things like technology and AI overshadow fundamental science and that older wisdom. We're putting one kind of knowledge on a pedestal, and we're doing it at the expense of everything else. So with all that fragmentation, what's the proposed fix? Well, the source introduces this really bold idea it calls a grand unification, and the whole point is to restore a single cohesive framework for health and wellness. The whole thing is built around this one word, ik. It's a concept from Sikh scriptures that means one. The goal here is to get us to completely shift our thinking. So, instead of seeing all these different medical paths as competitors, the source says we should see them as partners in a single system and all alliance for our health.
But, how could you possibly get all these different systems to actually work together? Well, the source's answer is pretty simple, at least in theory. You create a common language. It argues that if a modern drug and, say, an ancient herbal remedy could both be measured and described using the exact same universal metric, then they could finally be understood inside one single unified framework. All right, so how on earth does this theory propose we create that universal language? This brings us to the real engine of this whole idea, the core mechanism for this unification, a system the source calls Cymatics. The key, according to the author, is cymatics, which is the study of how vibrations create visible patterns. Think about how sound waves can make sand form these incredible complex patterns. The theory proposes that this isn't just a cool visual, it's a fundamental link between the physical world of particles and the biological world of living cells. It's the proposed universal translator. So this big idea, this conceptual bridge, leads to a pretty practical tool, the Gramuki metric system. The idea is that literally every therapy, a modern pill, a homeopathic tincture, an Ayurvedic herb, could all be measured using a single standard. Now, the source claims this standard, which is a gram-based metric, is already approved by the FDA and WHO for some medicines, which suggests there's already a foundation to build on.
So it really boils down to this three-step process. Step 1 is setting up that universal metric we just talked about. Step 2, that's the crucial translation phase, where the principles of cymatics are used to express all these different therapies in that one common unit. And then step 3, well, that's the big payoff, using this new shared language to bring all of medicine back into one unified framework.
But the theory's ambition doesn't stop with medicine. Nope, the source extends this unifying framework even further, trying to connect these very distinct concepts of life energy from different world traditions. This is where things get really interesting, trying to connect the dots between science and what you might call spirituality.
This table really brings the whole concept to life. So what the source does here is create this parallel structure for three totally different traditions. It takes Ayurveda's chakra system and links it to the modern concept of stress. Then it connects the Unani system's concept of Sephiroth to what we'd call a stroke. And finally, it lines up modern allopathy's visible energy, or partaksha, with the physical force of shear, which it suggests is what happens when the other two are out of balance.
And the unification goes even deeper, like right down to the fundamental sciences.
The source makes this really fascinating, kind of mind-bending claim that the basic rules of physics, how elements and particles work, are structurally similar to the rules of language and grammar. And it's this shared structure, it argues, that gives us the blueprint for understanding biology.
So, a key argument here is that your standard physics and chemistry, which are great for dealing with non-living matter, well, they just aren't quite enough to explain the incredible complexity of biology. To really get a handle on living systems, the source proposes we need to add another layer. It introduces this new framework it calls alchemy, which it defines simply as chemistry plus the organizational principles of cymatics.
So why does any of this matter, right? What's the end goal here? The text proposes this unified theory not just as some philosophical exercise, but as a real, practical solution to some of the world's most urgent problems.
So what could this actually do? Well, the source suggests the applications are vast. We're talking everything from the immediate, like rapidly repurposing drugs for new pandemics, all the way to the systemic. It claims this framework could lead to totally new medicines that are designed to balance the body's entire system and could even reshape global intellectual property to finally recognize and protect traditional knowledge.
And it all comes back to this one idea, the number one. The whole goal is to create one single collaborative pharmaceutical system, a system where experts from Allopathy, Ayurveda, and Homeopathy are no longer stuck in their separate silos, but can finally work as one team on global health crises, all speaking the same scientific language.
And a huge part of this is about making things fair, especially when it comes to innovation. The source calls for something called a community unitary patent system to protect traditional knowledge. The idea is simple. Instead of this knowledge being ignored, or worse, exploited, it would be formally integrated and protected through global bodies like WIPO. And this wouldn't just be symbolic, it would actually empower the very communities that have been the guardians of this wisdom for generations.
And that brings us to the final big idea from this source, a really provocative question that challenges us to rethink not just medicine, but how we organize knowledge itself. What if the next great breakthrough isn't some brand new invention, but the reintegration of everything we've allowed to splinter apart? That's our explainer for today.